Hi, I'm Doug Draper with Acme Distribution and the Denver Transportation Club, and I am pleased to present our series, Supply Chain and Logistics, the Storytellers. This series is brought to you by CAP Logistics, and CAP Logistics are experts in customizing transportation for all of your solutions. Please visit caplogistics.com today. So let's just jump into it. So today's topic, we're going to talk about education, the supply chain, and logistics, and we have a phenomenal guest and great storyteller. So Doug Brittin with the ITI Daniels Institute, we welcome you and thanks for joining us.
Great to be here. Thanks for having us.
Awesome. So before we jump into our topic, it's always nice to learn a little bit about our guest. So if you wouldn't mind spending a few minutes and just tell the audience a little bit about yourself, kind of how you got into the logistics and supply chain, and kind of what you're doing now.
Sure. And actually, I go back to my University of Denver roots a long way back. I was a DU graduate.
Oh, nice.
I actually worked my way through the university working on the railroad as a brakeman. So I do have probably some stories to tell that we don't take too long to get into
no,
here.
That's fine.
But ended up going into the transportation industry early on in my career and retired about a year and a half ago before joining the Institute. At Denver, and spent most of my time in aviation, air cargo side of things, but also worked for motor cargo trucking here in Denver a long time ago as well, and CF Air Freight. So that's kind of how I got my start.
Yeah, those are all names we remember.
All of them here.
Unfortunately,
right?
we remember, right?
Unfortunately, they're all gone.
Yeah.
Nothing that I had to do with. So.
Right.
But I spent the latter part of my career it kind of moved from sales and marketing to operations and security, and spent about 6-7 years in D.C. As a director of security programs for global aviation at TSA, before moving on to the International Air Cargo Association, where I retired a couple of years ago. So,
gotcha.
So I'm happy to be with DTI, the Denver Transportation Institute, now, because it kind of ties all those elements together for education. So
that's terrific. So I made a comment like, how did you find DU, or how did they find you? So you gave a good summary, and you were in DC. So how did you end up out here?
When I was working back east, I was connected. I knew I was going to come back to Denver through my retirement anyway at the end of my so-called operational career.
Sure.
And connected with the Institute and did some lectures in a couple of the programs at the master's program, working with Bill DeWitt, who was my predecessor, who is a great guy and now retired as well. So, so when I came out here, had some further conversations and was offered the position to take on the executive director of operations, and having a lot of fun with it. A lot of things that we can do. So.
Right, that's terrific. And how long have you been in that role?
Just since spring of this year, since May. So.
Okay.
So just really kind of diving into it.
You haven't had a chance to shake things up yet?
Not yet.
2019, that's when it's going to happen.
That's it, yeah.
That's cool. Good deal. Well, let's just kind of start about the state of education and kind of what other options are out there, right? So you kind of have the traditional path that, my son's about to graduate from high school and he's going into college, but then there's a whole nother level of education, which is continuing education and things of that nature. So give us your thoughts kind of on both tracks, as far as, do you see there's more education developing when you're entering the career as a 20-something, or do you see more into the professional development? Talk a little bit about both of those. Yeah,
well, I think certainly there's a lot of options in the professional side of the equation from the university standpoint, in both undergraduate, as we've talked about, but also many in the master's type program like we have at DTI. But great schools around the country that focus, I think, more on supply chain elements than pure transportation and all the other aspects of global commerce, so to speak. So I think those are very important for advancing one's career once you get into it. But probably from a standpoint of getting into the market and gaining entry and deciding to go into transportation, like I did a long time ago. I started out in education myself, so as a high school teacher, but moved over to transportation just because of more of the excitement in it. So, but you can also evolve and grow into the industry by beginning in operations and getting some operational training or sales training and moving forward that way too. So I think there's a couple of ways to go, but I think it's important to really know more about the operations of a company and get some on-the-ground, boots-on-the-ground type of training to advance your career, to get into it in the first place, and then maybe looking at the continuing education aspects of it going forward to advance. Yeah. So. Call that Booksmarts and Streetsmarts. I think so, yeah.
Right? You get the Booksmarts whenever, because a lot of those programs that I've seen are underneath the business school, right? So you're part of the logistics program. We were talking about Texas Tech earlier, and that's generally under the business school, so you're learning business, supply chain, and transportation is an element thereof.
Right.
So get the basics.
Well,
go
and that's
find-
a difference that we have at the Transportation Institute at DU. It's really more for people who are already in the transportation sector, maybe 8-10 years of experience, but maybe don't have a master's yet. A program we offer is a Master's of Science with a focus in transportation management. So it's people really want to broaden their experience, build a networking, build out their contacts throughout to better understand how the whole supply chain transportation element, especially if it works, to the benefit of their companies and to basically their careers as well, to advance their careers.
Yeah, I could definitely see that the Streetsmarts element. You learn the basics and then you apply it young in your career, then you realize I need this, that, or the other to kind of advance it to the next level.
And I think the Streetsmarts are very important. I think you really need to know, as I said, what goes on within the transportation supply chain to be successful in any aspect of whether you're in sales or operations or security or anything else, even cybersecurity now with the importance of protecting customers' data and your own data. I think knowing how those things all work from the ground up are very important, and then you can refine it going forward.
Right. Do you see the students that come to your program, is it an individual that's taking the initiative and it's coming out of their pocket, or are companies still supporting that and saying this is the development of our workforce?
From DU's DTI perspective, most of our students that come into the program are supported and sponsored by their organizations as part of retaining and growing people going forward. We do get a few that are in there on their own. We get some military people that have been in logistics that want to move out into the public sector that can really gain a lot of broader information that way. But most of them are, in our case anyway, are sponsored by their corporations. Gotcha.
You made a good point with the military. Does the military pay for that, or is it just they have a military background and their company they're now working for?
In most cases, their military units will give them the time while they're still in the military. We have a couple of students like that currently. Give them the time to do it because it does certainly take time away from their operational duties and responsibilities. But most of them are really on their own for their future development. So it's a real dedicated effort on their part. That's for sure. Yeah. But they're for the most part pretty dedicated people anyway.
Yeah, I would say so. With their background, they're going to stick to a plan and see it through. So we talked a little bit about the education piece and in the classroom and learning that, but then there's also the training aspect of it, right? So I'm learning this in the class, and I'm going to go implement it in the field. That would be more when they came over to the company side. So do you guys get involved with the training aspect of it, or is it more just the educational certificate program?
We do, and that's one of the things I like to see us become more engaged in, involved in going forward at the Institute. But we've done corporate training, developmental training on private basis for some large corporations in the transportation sector. We do through University College, where the Institute is housed, we do other types of specific training, like on security operations and so forth, whether it's aviation or surface. So those kind of things exist in bits and pieces around, but I think the training, the ongoing detailed training aspects of education are very important, and I'd like to see more of that. Now, of course, you can do that, and there's a lot of other avenues for that, too. I mean, the International Air Transportation Association, based in Geneva, does a lot of hazardous material type training and those kinds of things, which are very important for people. That's not the type of thing that we would get into. I don't think there's a lot of good avenues for that. So,
right. So. Can you talk a little bit about some of the partnerships? I know some of the adjunct professors you're involved with, kind of have day jobs, so to speak, where they're working. So talk a little bit about how you work with companies, and maybe you want to bring up a couple local if you can, just to say how does a company headquartered here in Denver that has a robust supply chain requirement, how do they partner up with your group?
That's actually how I got involved in it in the first place, with the Institute, when I was still with the government in that case, but later on with the International Air Cargo Association, working with the Institute to come in as a guest lecturer or as an adjunct professor. And as you mentioned, a lot of our professors do have full-time day jobs that come in for the program. So to teach specific courses, some of it's done in parallel with the instructors on campus or with Daniels Business College instructors, which is our partner in there. And one of the things that we just started in partnership with Daniels College at the university is a supply chain certificate program. And we're working with Jack Buffington from Miller Coors, who's come in to head that up as well. So, and that's going to expand even into a broader full supply chain program at Daniels and DU.
Nice. And that expansion, is it because you're getting good feedback from the students, or is it that doesn't really exist here in the Denver market?
There isn't that much of it here in the Front Range. I mean, as you and I have spoken in the past, there's a lot of industries or organizations out there and institutions that offer those types of programs, but not so much really here in the Colorado marketplace. So I think there's a good need for it here, and that's what we've identified, and want to help support that and feed it. And as business grows in Colorado, we need the professionals to run it. So.
Yeah, for sure. Does your the classes, I know, because we talk about there's air and there's ocean and rail and trucking. Do the classes and the certificates that you put out, is it specific to one of those modes, or does it kind of talk about a specific topic and it would cover all the different modes of transportation?
It really covers all elements of it. I mean, it's a Masters of Science program, which is great because you get all the great business operations, whether it's economics, finance, sales, and marketing on a broader business basis, as well as human capital management and all those kind of things. But then we also bring in, as you talked about, lecturers and professors who deal in specific elements of that. So you get a really broad-based aspect. So we have 3PL type companies that send their people like Schneider and Hub Group, railways like Norfolk Southern, CSX, BNSF, ports. A lot of the ports have sent their people because they're touching on so many elements of it. And I think that's really one of the unique aspects of what we do, is that you're coming away with a master's degree that really focuses on overall transportation, not one specific element.
Yeah,
so it's not really what we do is not warehousing and supply chain focused, which is what a lot of the organizations do out there. So.
Gotcha. Right. Yeah. So you can say, here's my certificate in this particular field, but you're more holistic.
Yeah, I'm not an aviation expert or a port expert or a rail expert. I really have a much broader understanding of how they all work. And that was the foundation of really what we did, was the Intermodal Institute, which has now changed to the Transportation Institute, to broaden that, because it's not just rail and truck and ports. So
yeah, you hear the name and you're like, oh, I'm not in that industry. I don't really need to.
But it all ties together. And then what we also do in there, which I think is very important, is when you're talking about expanding globally, global commerce, you have trade issues. I mentioned cybersecurity issues that have to be dealt with, and security issues. That's becoming a much greater concern. Customs issues, and you look what's going on in the trade elements in and out of the U.S. right now too. All those things are covered in great detail. So I think you come out with a very well-rounded education when you get the degree. So.
And that's good, because I was going to ask if it's just like centric within the U.S., but it sounds it's more of a global approach for
it is, and that's
education.
one of the things that we want to expand as well. We do have international students. We've had students from Mexico, from Canada, from Asia, but we want to expand it and really globalize not only the content to an even greater degree than it is now, but also the participation. Actually, one of the great elements of this program is that when people graduate from it, the last seminar that we have is a one-week seminar, usually at an international port city. So we've gone to Rotterdam. This year they're going to Narita, Shanghai, and Hong Kong as part of that final seminar. So really get a hands-on feel for what goes on to cover all of those elements in aviation.
So that's interesting to me that you bring that up. Like, what would they do at that point? So that's kind of the pinnacle of the class. So, all right, I'm going to go halfway across the world to a port. Tell me more about that. Like, why is that part of it?
It's a great hands-on experience to really see what's going on. For example, last year we sent them to Amsterdam, as well as Rotterdam, so they get to see the port operation in Rotterdam. In Amsterdam, they see how the aviation aspect of it works, not only from the passenger side, but also the cargo side. And then you're dealing with security and cargo handling. And then you get into, we sent them to an inland city to Jan Direct Logistics in the Netherlands, so they can actually see a multimodal air, rail, truck operation in a global setting, not just what happens here in the U.S. So they really get all aspects of it, which is great. So.
Have you had any feedback from the students, like, here's the way it works in the U.S., and oh my gosh, they're doing it so much differently in other parts of the country, so much better, or not the country, parts of the world. This is way different, and it makes complete sense, or we don't understand. Is there any feedback you get from the students on
We
that?
do, and it's not so much that it's better in any particular instance. We sent last summer, we also went to the port of Virginia for the domestic. We do a domestic port as well. So usually within these cohorts that go through, the teams all work together to go all the way through the program for 18 months, about 20 students going through that. But they get to see how it works here, and they see how it works on a global basis to cover all those elements. And it's really comparative, so they get to learn from the standpoint of, okay, this works great here. That might not work over there, and what they do might not work here. But you get to see the kind of the best of both worlds and build the best kind of cohesive standards around that. So.
Yeah. Yeah.
But just getting the understanding to see what goes on is great.
Yeah, I think that's huge. The study abroad concept.
Right. It is,
really
yeah.
branch
So
yourself.
it's a pretty
out.
intense week, though.
I can imagine.
Yeah.
I can imagine. When you and I were talking a couple days ago, cybersecurity and that, 15, pre 9/11, it was important, but it wasn't paramount, if you will. I mean, have you seen, talk about the education related to security and things of that nature as it's changed in the last 15, 20 years?
Certainly, it's increased almost like a hockey stick from the standards of needing it out there. I mean, when I started out in aviation and air cargo, you basically came in, you learned a little bit about the operations, you learned something about sales and how to build a consolidation, but you didn't have to learn anything about security or cybersecurity or how to protect information or data because it wasn't there. Nobody used it. It was a paper environment for the most part, right?
Sure.
And to a great degree, a lot of it still is. So now when you're out there working as a transportation provider, working with shippers, you really need to know what they're concerned about, how to protect their data, because it's all over the place now, whether it's customs information or proprietary data that they have. So from a transportation provider standpoint, it's important to understand what they need, how they protect it, because everybody wants more information, shipment status, tracking and tracing and everything else. But the more you put out there, the more susceptible it is to hacking and
Sure.
break-ins from that standpoint. And that's just on the data side. On the physical security side, you look what's changed in the last 15 years as well, from port security, from Customs and Border Protection, what they're looking for, what they have to look for at port security, background checks on personnel. Pretty much, those days you could just go to work and be in the industry. Now you have to have a security threat assessment, background checks, criminal checks, and everything else, and be aware of all those and be trained on it. So then you get into the corporate training for all those elements too. So it really stacks up. So
yeah, it's a different...
and then different regulations, from International Civil Aviation, TSA, you name it. So
Yeah, I was talking to a gentleman a couple days ago that was surprising to me that animal, I don't know the right terminology, but training of animals and dogs is kind of coming back, right? You got all this fancy equipment and this technology, but having a dog walk the warehouse before the cargo's loaded is still happens.
Well, dogs are coming back. There's also been talk about pigs, but we haven't gotten that far. Yeah, pigs have great noses. They really do for sensitivity. So, but you see, dogs at the airport. You see them at other venues like Bronco Stadium, at basketball games and parades and everything like that. So, and they're very effective from the standpoint of being able to be specifically targeted, whether it's drugs, narcotics, or explosives. And of course, in the aviation world, that's very
huge.
So, but they're coming back in a very big way because they are so efficient from what they can do. Instead of somebody screening individual boxes by X-ray or explosive trace detection, dogs can do a lot more volume, a lot more quickly.
Yeah, and they're mobile.
They are.
So you can go to the freight. The freight doesn't have to come to you.
That's exactly right. They're very flexible.
Yeah, that's great. We talked about the different modes with air and ocean and ground. As far as the Institute and the training in general, are you seeing education focus more on one of those different modes, meaning, hey, rail's out there, it's more domestic, it's not very glamorous, we're not too worried about that, or the perception of not being glamorous, let me clarify that.
Yeah.
Have you seen the training more aggressive in different modes? I guess hopefully I'm asking the question right.
Certainly, I think where we are is when you look at global commerce, and it's going to be different from when you move small packages and so forth in the U.S., whether it's Amazon, eBay, and everything else. The value of commerce is exponentially greater for what's moved by air versus what's moved on surface. That's just the nature of things.
Sure.
But the pure volume of goods moved from a size and everything else is surface. It's maritime, it's rail, it's truck moving through ports. So you see a lot of focus on how to move that most efficiently and getting the training elements around that from a standpoint of security. But when you look at that other small element, which is only 3% really of global commerce from a volume standpoint, but it's $35 trillion worth of commerce. The focus that people are moving into now to secure that from dangerous goods and from security to comply with all these regulations that, as you said, have come out since 9/11, that has really grown terrifically, and the need for that continues to arise because the regulations continue to change. So for people in the transportation community, being aware of all those pieces and now how to deal with them is important.
Right.
I was just talking the other day with one of the major express carriers in the U.S., and with all these continuing regulations and changes, they have to go through, number one, continual training of all their employees, and back on top of all the background checks. But now they're looking at saying, well, we need to train our upper management even more greatly on these aspects too, so they know what we're dealing with going forward and how to plan for it and prepare for it. So
sure. Yeah, there needs to be awareness at the highest level.
Right.
To validate, to understand the importance of the classes.
Used to be pretty much you could focus on operations and everything was fine, or you focus on sales, everything was fine. You kind of kept it in those channels and talked to each other. Now it's all interrelated, so you got to know all elements of it, and now security ties all of that together. So
yeah, it's pretty crazy. So if you were just getting into the industry, right, on the educational piece of it, what would kind of be your advice? Like, I'm green, I want to get in the industry, and I'm a 18-year-old kid that's about to go into college.
Yeah. Well, first of all, I mean, I think if you're going to go into this industry, you need to have both a business and I would say, a liberal arts type of background, because it's all about communication, I think. And I think a lot of business schools that teach, whether it's transportation or educate people on transportation as well as other elements, don't focus so much on the latter. So I think you'd behoove yourself to learn the business elements that are out there, but also focus on how to communicate with people, because I think that's the key piece of all this education is communication and understanding and awareness, outbound and inbound, how you absorb it and how you can communicate it going outward. So I think looking at it from that standpoint, but there are tons of webinars and other places you can go to if you've got an interest in it to look at. I want to be in operations, I want to be in flight training or flight operations, or I want to be in maritime or port operations. Groups like the National Customs Brokers and Forwarders Association, they offer all kinds of online webinars that you can bring yourself up to speed and learn more about it just by participating at a pretty low cost, quite frankly. So those are all valuable tools I think that a young person could look at before they decide to take this plunge. Because it seems like once you take the plunge into transportation, you stay there.
Yeah, it's called the mafia.
I think it is.
Once you're in, you're never out.
I think so.
So, well, good deal. We'll talk a little bit about, with your organization. You kind of have the floor, so to speak. So talk a little bit about more what the audience. Let me ask that again.
Okay.
Talk to us about your organization and what you would want our audience to know about how they can interact with DU and things you could offer.
Well, I think certainly we offer a great educational program at DU, from just the master's program that I spoke about earlier. Other training programs in security at the University College, which are even outside of the Transportation Institute, but there are a lot of security, supply chain, global awareness type of programs that are within University College. What we're doing now, I think I mentioned too, is with Daniels College, we're opening up a new supply chain certificate program. Both a 4-unit course and a 6-unit course program where you come out with a certificate, and that's going to develop further into a full supply chain degree. So that's a joint DU-DTI program. But what we're always looking for is input from the local business community on talking about bringing in business cases, talking about what they do, how they do it, because that's all needs to be built into the programs going forward in all aspects. So I think on the incoming way, that's how we can all work together maybe more closely in that environment. And then we also like to support things like Operation Stimulus, where we can train and bring younger people into the industry as well, because it's, as you mentioned before, maybe not the most glamorous business, but it's a great opportunity to learn more about what happens everywhere in the world. My 40-plus years in transportation, seeing manufacturing operations from nuclear facilities to anything else, it's a great business to be in. You really need to know more about what works around it.
Yeah, for sure. Well, I'm glad you mentioned Operation Stimulus, and we'll talk more about that on different episodes. But this is an event focused on supply chain logistics, primarily for undergraduate students. They come in from all over the world to learn about, in North America, because we have some Canadian schools that come down. But that would be a great way for our audience to engage. If they go to operationstimulus.org, they can learn more about the event. And specifically, we were talking on January 31st
coming up
at the Denver Renaissance Hotel. There's a reception in the evening. You'll be there to help.
We plan to be there, absolutely, yes.
To help promote
it in the past and in the future. So it's a great program.
That's terrific. So education abound. It's everywhere. And
you need it.
Yeah, exactly. So you've been a terrific storyteller today. Thank you so much for coming in. And thank you for joining us today on the Connect and Collaborate Network, featuring the supply chain logistics, the Storytellers, brought to you by Cap Logistics. So thanks again. Have a great day.
Thanks for having me.
Bye-bye.